Martin O'Malley just signed off on the biggest Social Security benefit increase in over a decade, and he did it without a single camera rolling. No press conference, no fanfare, just a quiet signature that could put an extra $6,200 in millions of American pockets this year. If you're wondering whether you qualify or why this happened so quietly, stick around because the details matter more than the headlines. So here's what happened. 3 days ago, Social Security Commissioner Martin O'Malley approved what's being called the Fairness in Benefits Act, essentially a technical adjustment that corrects how certain benefits are calculated. The result? Some recipients will see their monthly checks jump by up to $516, which works out to about $6,200 annually. But here's the thing that caught my attention. This wasn't announced with the usual political theater. No Rose Garden ceremony, no triumphant press release. Just a quiet administrative change that affects roughly 2.8 million Americans. That's either refreshingly efficient government work, or there's more to this story. Let's start with who actually benefits from this change, because the eligibility rules are more specific than you might think. First, you need to be what Social Security calls a dual status beneficiary. That means you worked both in the private sector and for a government entity that didn't pay into Social Security. Think teachers, firefighters, or postal workers who had multiple careers. Here's a real example. Sarah worked 15 years as a high school teacher in Texas, where teachers don't pay into Social Security. Then she spent another 20 years working for a private accounting firm that did. Under the old rules, her Social Security benefits were reduced because of something called the windfall elimination provision. Basically, the system assumed she was double-dipping. The new calculation method recognizes that Sarah actually paid into Social Security for those 20 private sector years, so her benefits should reflect that. For someone in her situation, we're talking about an increase from around $1,100 per month to roughly $1,600. Second category, surviving spouses who fall under similar circumstances. If your deceased spouse worked in both sectors, you might have been getting shortchanged on survivor benefits. The adjustment corrects that calculation too. According to the Social Security Administration's internal memo, which was obtained by the Congressional Budget Office, the breakdown looks like this. About 800,000 people will see increases between $50 and $200 per month. That's the largest group, mostly part-time government workers or those with relatively short careers in the affected sectors. Another 1.2 million will see increases between $200 and $400 monthly. These are typically people who split their careers more evenly between government and private work. The remaining 800,000, the ones getting the full 516 monthly boost, these are people who had substantial careers in both sectors and were hit hardest by the original calculation method. Now here's where it gets interesting from a policy perspective. The total cost of this adjustment is estimated at $15.6 billion over the next 5 years. That's real money, but it's also money that arguably should have been paid out correctly from the beginning. So why didn't this get the typical political treatment? I think there are a few reasons, and they tell us something about how government actually works versus how we think it works. First, this is technically a correction, not a new benefit. The windfall elimination provision was always supposed to prevent true double-dipping, not penalize people who legitimately earned benefits in multiple systems. When the Government Accountability Office reviewed the formula last year, they found it was overcorrecting in about 40% of cases. Second, the timing matters. O'Malley has been Social Security Commissioner for less than a year, and he's been pretty vocal about wanting to modernize how the agency operates. Making this change through administrative action, rather than waiting for Congress, actually demonstrates competence, something politicians don't always want to highlight when they're trying to show they're fighting for you. But there's also a political calculation here. Republicans have been pushing for Social Security reforms that would reduce overall spending. Democrats want to expand benefits. This change threads the needle. It increases benefits for a specific group without adding to the long-term solvency problem, because it's really just correcting an existing error. Not everyone thinks this was handled correctly, though. Senator Rick Scott's office released a statement calling this backdoor benefit expansion without proper oversight. His argument is that any change affecting billions in spending should go through Congress, not be decided by administrative action. And look, he's not entirely wrong about the process. The Social Security Administration has broad authority to interpret how benefits are calculated. But $15.6 billion is a lot of money to move around without legislative input. On the other side, advocacy groups like the National Committee to Preserve Social Security argue this change is long overdue. Mary Johnson from the Senior Citizens League pointed out that some affected beneficiaries have been underpaid for decades. This isn't expansion, she told reporters, it's correction. The reality is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, this corrects a legitimate calculation error, but yes, it also sets a precedent for significant benefit changes happening through administrative action rather than legislation. If you think you might qualify, here's what you need to know about the rollout. The changes take effect with February 2025 payments, which means you'll see the adjustment in early March. If you qualify, Social Security will automatically recalculate your benefits. You don't need to apply or file anything. However, and this is important, the agency is also conducting what they call retroactive corrections for people who should have been receiving higher benefits in previous years. If you've been affected by the windfall elimination provision since 2019, you should receive a lump sum payment covering the difference. For someone who was underpaid by $300 per month for 5 years, that's an $18,000 check. Those payments are scheduled to go out in April and May. Now here's my skeptical take. The Social Security Administration has been notoriously slow with implementing changes in the past. Their computer systems are older than some of the people receiving benefits. So while the timeline sounds reasonable, I'd be surprised if it goes off without delays or glitches. This change also highlights a larger issue with how we think about Social Security. The system was designed in the 1930s when most people had one career with one employer. The reality now is that people change jobs, change sectors, work multiple gigs, and move between public and private employment. The windfall elimination provision was created in 1983 to address a real problem. Some people were gaming the system by working just long enough in Social Security-covered employment to qualify for benefits, while also receiving pensions from non-covered work. But the formula they created was blunt and ended up penalizing people who weren't gaming anything. This correction suggests that maybe we need to think more systematically about updating Social Security for how people actually work today. O'Malley has hinted at broader reforms coming, and this might be a test case for whether administrative changes can work better than waiting for Congress to act. From a political standpoint, this move is pretty clever. O'Malley gets credit for helping 2.8 million Americans without having to fight a congressional battle. The Biden administration gets to point to concrete action on Social Security without touching the third rail of broader reform. Republicans are in a tricky spot because they can't really argue against correcting calculation errors, but they also don't want to encourage more administrative changes to Social Security. Watch for this to become an issue in the next round of appropriations hearings. The timing also matters for 2024 politics. These benefit increases will show up in people's bank accounts right around the time campaign season kicks into high gear. That's probably not an accident. But let's be real about the challenges ahead. The Social Security Administration is going to have to recalculate benefits for nearly 3 million people, issue lump sum payments, and update their systems to handle the new calculation method going forward. Their track record on major system changes isn't great. Remember the disability benefits backlog in 2019? Or the overpayment crisis in 2021? The agency has good intentions but limited capacity. I talked to someone who used to work at SSA, and they estimated this change will require updating at least 6 different computer systems, some of which run on programming languages that are barely taught anymore. The agency says they've been preparing for this for months, but preparation and execution are different things. If you think you qualify, keep good records and be patient with the process. Going forward, there are a few things worth paying attention to. First, watch the implementation. If this goes smoothly, it suggests the Social Security Administration might be more capable of handling complex changes than we've given them credit for. If it's a mess, that tells us something about the limits of administrative action. Second, watch the political reaction. If Republicans make a big deal about the process, it might make future administrative changes less likely. If they focus on other issues, it suggests this approach might work for other corrections. Third, watch for similar changes. O'Malley has talked about reviewing other aspects of benefit calculations that might need updating. This could be the first of several administrative corrections. So here's my take on what just happened. Martin O'Malley quietly fixed a problem that's been shortchanging millions of Americans for decades. He did it through administrative action rather than waiting for Congress, and the result is that 2.8 million people are going to see bigger Social Security checks. Whether you think this was good governance or an overreach probably depends on your view of how government should work, but the practical result is clear. If you worked in both government and private sector jobs, you might be getting a significant increase in your Social Security benefits. The bigger question is whether this signals a new approach to Social Security reform, making targeted corrections through administrative action rather than waiting for comprehensive legislative overhaul. Given how Congress has handled Social Security over the past decade, that might not be the worst strategy. If you think you might qualify for these adjustments, keep an eye on your February and March statements. And if you don't see changes you think you should, the Social Security Administration's website has tools to help you understand the new calculations. This story matters because it affects millions of people directly, but it also matters because it shows how policy actually gets made, sometimes quietly, sometimes efficiently, and sometimes without the political circus we've come to expect. What do you think? Should major benefit changes go through Congress, or is administrative correction the way to get things done? Let me know in the comments. And if this helped clarify what's happening with Social Security, consider subscribing for more breakdowns of policy changes that actually affect your wallet.